Again, I'm talking about calendars in regard to the ASCA RAMP, Recognized ASCA Model Program application. And the first thing, whenever I talk about one of the components of RAMP, I always refer to that rubric. So I'm going to click right away on that calendar rubric. I separated the calendar rubric from the other components, and just going to talk about that for a brief minute. So there's really two pieces when we talk about calendar. The first is the annual calendar. So you'll be providing an annual calendar for the most recently completed academic year. So the reason we're having this meeting at this time is ideally, a lot of folks are doing their planning for next year. Some people do a little bit of their planning now. Some people do their planning at the beginning, maybe a little bit of both. But you're going to have an annual calendar. And so we created at Battleground High School, I'll show you an example in a minute, but we created our annual calendar of things that we plan to do throughout the 9-month school year. And then right now, what I'm working on doing is updating that calendar because, as the year goes on, as you might imagine, you add things, you subtract things, things come up, and you change things. So that when you apply for RAMP, it's based on the previous year, but of course you're going to have a draft of what you plan to do. That's your basis, and then you tighten that up over the summer. Also, if you are a part of a large team, especially at a high school or middle school, you're going to have 2 weekly calendars from each school counselor. So again, that's the second bullet here, 2 weekly counselors from each school counselor, 1 for the fall and 1 for the spring. And what I've told my folks is that we are, of course, flashlighting, and I know that your district talks about that we're flashlighting a particular week. Every week's different, as you know. Every week, every month has different priorities. So you're going to flashlight, quite honestly, your best week. And by that, RAMP means that your time allocations are in line with what the ASCA National Model expects us to do in terms of direct and indirect services. So 80% of our time in direct services with students and 20% in indirect services. And this is also in alignment with the annual agreement. Could be in your annual agreement, your percentages are a bit different than that, but the whole idea being that we spent our time in the way that we intentionally set out to do so. And so what I told my team is, a great time is when you know that you spent a good amount of time in the classroom, individual counseling, and small groups. You just had that nice balance, lots of direct services, lots of different aspects of the ASCA National Model when we're really doing that great work with students. And we chose the month of February because we knew we were going to be in the classroom a lot with the forecasting lessons and that sort of thing. You'll see that in my example. So 1 weekly calendar from each calendar for each counselor, for fall and for spring, in addition to the annual. And you're, again, flashlighting a really great week. It helps a lot, of course, as you might imagine, if you update your calendar. And, if it's an individual, some people are better at that than others. If you're on a team, some members of the team handle that a little bit differently. At our school, the majority of us use Outlook, whether it was Outlook or Google. If you have an electronic calendar format, that would be ideal. Some folks are still using the paper, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you do have to be keeping track of your time. I know that off the top of my head in your district, you're doing some of the time task analysis, so none of this is going to be unfamiliar to you. So if you look at the rubric, and I'm always paying attention to the exemplary, the annual calendar is highly detailed. So in other words, when I read that annual calendar, you have to imagine an outside reader is going to be looking at that, and they have to know what you mean. So you have to be really careful not to be using abbreviations or acronyms that wouldn't be familiar, and just use terminology that is commonly understood, so that an outside reader is going to look and say, oh yeah, I can clearly see what they're working on this week, and I can see how that ties into the data that they identified as a need and the goals that they set, and I can see here how that ties into the annual agreement. It's really creating that picture of what you know your students need, what you set out to do with your students, and it's got that great picture. That's in that second bullet. I just talked about that. But again, if you set out as a goal, we're going to do this thing, that thing, we need to see it in the annual calendar. You know, if you said you're going to run groups, where do you see that coming from? When did you work on that? I already mentioned this bullet here. The 2 weekly calendars are highly detailed, and again, correlate to the percentage of time allocated in the annual agreement.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course, please.
So I see that this is kind of what we need to have included in our submission, but who truly is our audience, or should our audience be for our calendars?
That's a good question. Well, ideally, since our goal in this particular case is to achieve RAMP designation, it would be the RAMP evaluators, which are all school counselors, you know, professional school counselors that have gone through the process. So yeah, that's your audience, and that's a good question. I mean, for the most part, our colleagues are going to understand our acronyms and our terminology. It's not for a wide or general audience. Yeah, so that's a good question there. Does that
so
make
if
sense?
we're talking about like just ask a best practice, then,
yeah.
Then do we want to have our like yearly calendar on our website, or like do parents, should they have access to our like monthly calendars, or I mean just to kind of see what what we're doing, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in my opinion, I think you're bringing up a really good point. I mean, the ideal would be, yeah, absolutely. You've got your, especially your annual calendar out there on the website so that all your stakeholders can see what's going on. I think that very much ties into the advisory council. You'd want to give your annual calendar to the advisory council, which is a wide spectrum of stakeholders. And absolutely, it's just great advocacy for our program, for everybody to know what we're trying to accomplish for students. It's just good for school counseling, and it's good for students, for that matter, as well, to know what they can expect, what's upcoming. Absolutely. And in terms of, you know, I mean, I would say that ideally, if you could strike a balance of a calendar that maybe could be understood by a wide audience, as well as give the kind of detail that a RAMP reviewer would need, that'd be the ideal. But if not, maybe you have 2 separate calendars. Maybe you have one that's highly detailed for purposes of RAMP, and then maybe you have one that's your annual calendar light that just has the key things that you'd want your stakeholders to.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at a sample of a RAMP submission from, where is this? Lakes High School.
Mm-hmm.
South Lakes High School.
Yeah.
And in their calendar narrative, it talks about all of the people that were seeing their calendars, but then so like the annual calendar was for this purpose or that purpose, and then there was a different calendar for another purpose. So kind of like what you're saying, but part of the narrative that made this exemplary, as an example, was kind of how they explained how they use the calendar as a communication piece, I guess.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, and you're getting into a great piece that I didn't even plan to talk about, but I'm glad you're bringing up, which is, yeah, when you apply for RAMP, you're going to have that narrative, and that narrative is really your chance to, you know, give the story behind the story. You know, here was our thinking when we wrote the calendar this way, and as you said, we wanted it to be an advocacy piece. We wanted to put it out there. Absolutely. And that's another just good general point that you're making is you might want to, as you're going through this process, start to jot down some notes. All that's fresh in your mind. You know, if you're not doing the narrative until the very end, you're jotting down some notes like, why did we choose to do it that way? Oh, yeah, that's why we chose to do it this way.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And yeah, and actually, your point here is actually a super transition to the fact that, yeah, I included a link to, in addition to the rubric, I always like to refer to the RAMP application examples, and yeah, it sounds like you've already looked at some of them, and what I noticed is they're all quite different. I mean, the South Lakes one was kind of a a narrative list, and then others have, you know, a monthly, others is kind of abbreviated. And when I was going through the national board process, they used to tell me over and over until I got tired of it, it's all in how you write it, you know, and so I think the point is it doesn't really matter how you create your annual calendars. There's not a right or wrong way, but you do need to, in your narrative, explain this is why we did it this way, this is what we mean by, it just needs to, you know, just have a intentionality behind it.
Okay, that makes sense.
So cool, great stuff. Any other questions? And do I have Jeannie on the line now?
Yes, you do.
Hi, Jeannie. Good afternoon. Hi. Jump in at some point. All right, cool. So again, keep jumping in. That's great stuff. What else did I want to talk about? Okay, so we just kind of talked about a little bit those RAMP application examples, and so it is really wise, and it sounds like you've already done that, to kind of take a peek and see what other people have done. It's also kind of a style thing. Some people, a certain style suits them better than others. I'll show you the one that we're working from at Battleground High School, and it might suit your style, might not. Actually, this one here, I think this is a middle school example, but this one is pretty close to how we did things at Battleground. We liked this particular style, seemed to suit us, but I've seen 3 or 4 different styles of the annual calendar. Okay, so moving on from there. Well, here we go. So rubric we talked about, the application examples I encourage you to take a look at. So here's our annual calendar for Battleground High School, our counseling department. I built this in Word using a template. If you'd like me to email you the Word template or give you some more information, don't be afraid to email me or ask me questions now, but we just created this in Word, and you can see we have each day a quick little narrative. This is what we're working on generally, and then off to the right giving more detail. And this is a draft. It's still very much in a draft because I'm still working on the language, and I'm still updating what we plan to do from what we actually did. So it's in process. I'd say it's probably 75% there. But anyway, so each day shows what we're working on, and then over to the right gives you some more detail in case that's not clear. And to Nicole's earlier point about whose audience this is for, this is probably more for a school counselor audience or a RAMP reviewer audience. If I was to have this on the website, it wouldn't hurt anything, but I probably would have different kinds of details or less detail. The other piece is that it's a little bit tricky. I like to put things in the calendar like fall counselor workshop. You know, like if the majority of the teams at the fall counselor workshop, you know, that's part of our professional development. It's written into the annual agreement, so I want it on the calendar. But it's not a direct service to students necessarily. So that's kind of a tricky piece as well, is your calendar needs to reflect primarily what you're trying to accomplish for students, but of course there are things in the calendar that, you know, you just might need to be paying attention to. Your program's got to work around those things, or maybe they're sidecar, they're working with your program. For another example is when we have all the EOC testing or the Smarter Balance testing. Well, that's not a time that we're running a lot of small groups or lessons probably. And we need to plan around those things, so that's why, you know, you'll see those dates in our calendar. We need to be paying attention to that. So it's a bit of a trick in terms of how much detail you're going to put in here and what audience you're working for. You'll also notice as I'm looking at my example here, you can see like the first couple of months have high detail off to the right. And then as the months go on, low detail. And that's not because we weren't working hard. It's because I'm still working on this to provide more detail off to the right and kind of fill in the blanks. And again, this was just a draft we used for planning purposes. And then I'm comparing that to my Outlook calendar and other department members' calendars and other calendars we got floating around to kind of pull the whole together for what we would ultimately submit for RAMP. that make sense on annual calendar?
Yep.
All right. All right, so there's no more questions. I'll move on from that. So again, ours is in this format. We looked at the South Lakes for a minute. It's kind of in the agenda written format. The next thing I want to show you, this is a raw calendar. So I maintain my calendar in Outlook. So I just printed a copy, scanned it, ran it as a PDF, and blacked out any identifying student information. And so, I mean, you can see this is from February, and you can see this is the time that we were forecasting, and forecasting is one of our lessons. We have process perception results based for our forecasting lessons, and I spent a good portion of Monday forecasting and other parts of the day. But then there was also a lot of individual planning going on, some planning for 8th grade forecasting, and also some collaboration. A little hard to tell, but there were some IEP meetings, new student registration, and so it's a pretty good typical week. But you'll also notice there's some blank spots. That's not because I was sitting around. None of us ever do that. It is because I didn't have scheduled appointments in there. I also need to put in my lunches. So I say this is a raw example because it's not a perfect example. I'm going to need to fill in the rest of those spaces. Now, we have student sign-ins, and so I can go to the student sign-ins or my memory recall and just try to remember what I was doing. I might have been making some phone calls. I might have been doing some emails, a variety of different things during those periods of time. But the key is, grab a good week where you're busy with a lot of direct services to students. This is not a time where we're running small groups. That would have been even more ideal, because then you could really see the balance of, lessons, small groups, and individual planning. And I think I've got all high school folks on the line today. Remember that at the high school ASCA National Model, a lot of our time is spent in individual planning, so that's perfectly appropriate. At some of the younger grades, it might be more weighted toward the classroom lessons. So then what happens here, and this is the tricky part, so you have to, again, you have to keep up the calendar, you have to maintain it, you have to get all your team members on board, and you have to have at least enough detail in here so that you can remember what was going on, get your lunches in there, and that might be a training piece for everybody. We've only got a week, but we got to maintain that thing. So then here's what happens next, and since I know you're familiar with South Lakes, South Lakes did, they translated that raw calendar into this. And I haven't done this yet for my calendar, but what you would do is you would type in exactly what you were doing, description of activity, and you have to have enough detail that, again, someone can understand.
That's exactly what we did for our time task analysis.
Oh, sweet. So this is easy for you. This is, yeah, cool. Yeah, in the ASCA RAMP or the ASCA time task analysis, it's in the same format, isn't it?
Yeah, we just had to come up with our cheat sheet on what we counted for what, so we were all consistent.
Oh, well, and that's a very good point as well. Absolutely, you have to have that communication, and so it sounds like you've already done that. That's super. So yeah, so in my case, I'm taking the raw calendar and putting it in this so that I can see exactly how much time was spent in the different areas. And so for your group, this will be real familiar. Yeah, and then you're just adding up, and again, the idea being it all matches up. I like to say it's all kind of in a nice straight line from what our students need, our goals, our annual agreement, how we spent our time as a group, as a team, and then how we spent our time as individuals. It's all just kind of matching up in this beautiful symphony, working all together. So yeah, that's really calendar. Now, tell me this. I mean, does your team, is there consistency in how people calendar their time? Are you all on Outlook, Google, paper, combination?
Oh, so here at Sumner High School, we're all on Google. We use our Google calendars.
Okay.
So our secretary has access to all of our counselors, and then we have shared with each other. So, and then our secretary prints out our daily calendar and we have it on our door.
Cool.
So we post that. So that's kind of something cool that we do. And then being able to, like when I need to schedule a meeting or the secretary needs to schedule a meeting with all of us, we can pull up each other's schedules to see what works for us. So we see each other's schedules, and then we post our daily schedule on the on our door.
Awesome. Well, and that kind of goes back to a little bit what we were talking about earlier. That's just good advocacy for program as well as everybody kind of knowing what we're doing. We're always working hard for students. It's real visible and out there, and the communication. So that's cool. That's real cool. Yeah, I think for your team, it's just a matter of keeping up that calendar, keep doing what you're doing, and then translating it into the format that looks very much like your time task analysis and picking a good week that's a nice matchup. So this shouldn't be difficult for you at all. How about the annual calendar? Do you have something? What is yours? Do you have one presently, or what does yours look like?
Well, that's something that we do need to work on, is the annual calendar of what we're doing at what time of the year, all of us together, and then individual by grade level. So we need to do, that's something that we have had in the past, but we didn't have this year.
Got it.
And then we tried to have an annual calendar for our PLC, for purposes for our PLCs, and we had that year before, not this year, last year we did, but then we never got around to getting that done this year.
Got it. And I can relate. Every year is different, isn't it? And yeah, that's one of I mean, I appreciate you being here. That's one of the cool things about RAMP is it's a good reason to kind of get everybody back together and getting back to things that we've done in the past that were best practices. So yeah.
Right.
So really, folks, that's all I had. I wanted to quickly cover the annual calendar and the weekly calendars. Again, remember fall and spring. Grab up those examples from the RAMP website. If you like the way we're doing our annual calendar and you want my Word template, I'll be happy to send it to you, but I imagine there's probably other better ways or different ways of doing it as well. Are there any other questions, thoughts?
I don't think so from me for now.
Okay. All right.
Hey, Brian, this is Eric.
Hey, Eric. Hey, glad you could join us.
Well, I got here for the last 10 minutes. Sorry about that, but it's Christine Knapp and I are here from Bonnie Lake High School, and I don't think questions.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you could make it all. At the beginning we were talking about it. It's such a busy time of year for everybody, and everything you're looking at is in the WSCA scene and also in the Dropbox, and I've been recording, so I'll either post this recording if everybody's okay with it, or I might clean up a shorter version and get it on the web, just so that anybody that missed us that wants to move forward can always do so.
Okay.
All right, so let's see. I heard from Nicole. I heard from Eric. Jeannie, do you have anything, any questions, anything to add?
No, but thank you for your time.
You bet, absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, I thank you all very much for joining us, and I always say it, but I always mean it. I appreciate your commitment to the profession and your interest in RAMP. I learn as much from you as I do from just doing this. There will be an August meeting. It is tentatively scheduled for August 14th, as Nicole pointed out, but as we get a little bit closer, I might send out a little email, and I think last time I tried Doodle, if that's what it was, to figure out a good time for everybody. So we'll try to find a good time for everybody. And the next one, I think Nicole reminded me of it earlier. I think it's the action plans. Is that right? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna look, and that is an important one. And we'll cover that quickly. Just a comment I'll make is that we're working on our calendar now, and as we're putting in our calendar, we are kind of highlighting, well, this is when we want to teach this particular lesson to this grade. This is what we're thinking of teaching. So we do start to jot down things that we're planning to teach, and of course all these things cross over into each other. But yeah, the action plan really gets specific into exactly what we're going to teach when with those mindsets and behaviors and the process, perception, results data. And it can get a little tricky. I'm no expert, but I'll share what I know, and we'll talk about some best practices and hopefully have a good meeting. So everyone have a great summer. Email me if you have questions, but otherwise have a great summer, and we'll be talking in August.
You too. Thank you so much. This has been so helpful, Brian.
No problem. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.